Located to the southeast of India, Sri Lanka is considered a hidden gem of the Indian Ocean. This island nation, also known as the Pearl of Indian Ocean, not only boasts of a unique natural beauty, extraordinary biodiversity and precious gemstones, but is also famous for its tea and cinnamon production. It is interesting to note that India's southern tip and Sri Lanka's northern tip is separated by only 54 km. You will also be amazed to know that India's Andaman and Nicobar Island are not as close to the mainland as Sri Lanka is. In fact, scholars believe that thousands of years ago, Sri Lanka and India were connected by a land bridge that is today lost somewhere in the sea. You probably know that Sri Lanka's Tamil population, mainly concentrated to the north, had migrated from India, and therefore these two regions share a number of cultural similarities. Sri Lanka's major religion, Buddhism, also had its origins in India. Moreover, there is evidence of the fact that Sri Lanka was also ruled by the Indian empires of Cholas and Pandyas. Naturally, a number of people wonder why this island nation that has so much in common with India and is so close to it is in fact not a part of India. What are the reasons behind Sri Lanka being a separate state? Did Sri Lanka ever want to be a part of India? Is it possible for India and Sri Lanka to be one nation in future? Friends, in today's video, we will try and answer these questions. So let's start with today's discussion by understanding the reasons why Sri Lanka should have been a part of India. When it comes to the idea of a nation state, culture, language, and history are the determining factors. Modern nation states are supposed to have originated in 18th and 19th century Europe, when it was swept over by a tide of nationalism. Before that, people belonging to different cultural and linguistic groups belonged to different kingdoms. But after the birth of nationalism, nations were formed on the basis of a uniform culture, history, and language, as was the case of the Italian and German unification. According to scholars, India and other states in South Asia were also established as modern nation states. They claim that Britishers unintentionally inspired a sense of nationalism among Indians that led to India's emergence as a modern nation state in 1947, whose people were united by a common history, culture, and language. But despite a shared history and culture, separate nation states were also formed. For example, Sri Lanka. Friends, the story of the cultural similarities of India and Sri Lanka is quite old. You may know that in one of the most important Hindu epics, Ramayana, Ravan's island kingdom was called Lanka. This is the same place where Ravan had imprisoned Mata Sita. To rescue her from her captivity, Bhagwan Ram led his army of monkeys to take over Lanka. The popular belief is that present-day Sri Lanka was the capital of Ravan's kingdom, Lanka. Therefore, a number of followers of Hinduism believe that Sri Lanka should be a part of India since it was won by Ram, who ruled Ayodhya in India. Beyond this cultural similarity, history gives us ample evidence of the interconnections between the two nations that is often used to strengthen the argument that India and Sri Lanka should have been one nation. In ancient times, hunters and gatherers, also known as Vedas, migrated from the Indian mainland to Sri Lankan island. This was the same time when migration from Africa to the Indian subcontinent was underway. Vedas can still be found in many parts of Sri Lanka. They are also believed to be the direct descendants of the earliest inhabitants of Sri Lanka, called Belangoda man. We also find evidence of the Indo-Aryans migration in Sri Lanka. Indo-Aryans started arriving in Sri Lanka from North India from the 5th century BC with their respective tribes and groups. Indo-Aryans were essentially Indo-European cattle farmers who migrated from Central to South Asia in 2000 BCE. Sri Lankan chronicles and historical records like Mahavamsa and Dipavamsa etc. even suggest that in 500 BC, southern Bengal's Prince Vijaya and his 700 followers migrated to and settled in Sri Lanka. He is also believed to be the first Sinhala king. But now the question arises, who were the Sinhalese? Friends, the Sinhalese group emerged from the intermingling of the Indo-Aryans and Sri Lankan indigenous people. Today, it is the dominant group in the Sri Lanka. Moreover, from 1000 to 500 BC, Sri Lanka was culturally connected to southern India. These two regions shared megalithic burials, pottery, iron technology, farming techniques, etc. Megalithic burials are above ground burial chambers built of large stone slabs laid on edge and covered with the earth or other smaller stones. Then from the 3rd century BC to 1200 AD, Tamil from central, eastern and southern India who spoke the Dravidian language migrated to Sri Lanka. Today, Tamils make up 15% of the Sri Lankan population. Most Sri Lankan Tamils reside in the northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka. Also, as we have already mentioned, Sri Lanka's most important religion, Buddhism, was from India. According to Deepa Vamsa, Sri Lanka's oldest historical record, during the rule of Sri Lankan king Devanamapaya Tissa, Indian Emperor Ashok's son Mahinda initiated Buddhism in Sri Lanka in the 4th century AD. A branch of the Bodhi tree was brought to Sri Lanka. Buddhist memorials and ashrams were the first to be built. Today, Sri Lanka's state religion is Buddhism, and it has nearly 70.2% followers. Friends, let's now look at the medieval history. Around the 10th century AD, Emperor Rajaraja Chola of South India's powerful Chola Empire sent his massive army to Sri Lanka to lay siege to the Anuradhapura kingdom. Anuradhapura kingdom was the earliest established kingdom in Sri Lanka. After its capture, Sri Lanka became a part of the Chola Empire. Sinhalese kings started ruling over Sri Lanka under the Chola rule. Then in the 13th century, after the collapse of the Chola rule, another South Indian dynasty, Pandyan, invaded Sri Lanka and established the Jaffna kingdom there. After the Jaffna kingdom, many kingdoms came and went. This is because the successive empires, though great, could not establish their dominance in South India and hence lost Sri Lanka, to which remained under the rule of the local rulers. Few centuries later, when the imperial and colonial rule by the European trade companies commenced, India and Sri Lanka came under the radar of Portuguese, Dutch and British traders. Anyway, after centuries of struggle, British hegemony was established in the region and India and Sri Lanka came under British rule. Therefore, both these nations share a common colonial history too. The introductions of railways and tea plantations by the Britishers are common to both. They share a similar colonial experience. Beyond history too, India and Sri Lanka share many similarities in the present time. So what are they? The first definitely is that, like India, Sri Lanka is a democracy that follows a republic philosophy. Both of them share quite similar political systems due to the common colonial experience. Moreover, Sri Lankan food practices match South Indian food practices, especially that of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. When it comes to language, Tamil obviously is common to both the nations. Tamil is the native language of the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. It is spoken in almost 1/4 of Sri Lanka. Both nations have followers of Buddhism and Hinduism. The only difference is that Sri Lanka has a bigger Buddhism population and India has a bigger Hindu population. Given the similarities, perhaps it is possible to wonder why these two nations are not in fact one. But we will look at why they are not in the next section. From Sri Lanka's perspective, there are a couple of reasons. Firstly, it has rarely happened in Sri Lanka's history that it was ruled by a foreign empire or ruler. With few exceptions, it has mostly remained independent. Yes, Cholas and Pandyans had controlled it during their rule, but even as part of their kingdom, Sri Lanka was ruled by local Sinhalese rulers. Indo-Aryans had also arrived, but they gradually became one with the indigenous people and adopted a new culture and identity. British rulers also ruled India and Sri Lanka separately. Hence, no nation that was remained independent and distinct would want to be a part of another nation. No leader would let go of power so easily. Secondly, Sinhalese are a distinct group in themselves. As we saw previously in this video, Sinhalese culture was an amalgamation of the Indo-Aryan and indigenous culture which was native to Sri Lanka. Sinhalese is a distinct ethnic group that is different from India. Despite sharing cultural, linguistic and religious similarities like the Indo-Aryan language or Theravada Buddhism, hence despite the Buddhist connection, Sinhalese consider themselves different from Indians and want to be governed by a Sinhala government. Moreover, as we already know, India was governed by different kingdoms before the arrival of the British. But with their arrival, the British transformed India into one administrative unit, and from there, our leaders began to conceptualize the Indian nation state. But you would also know that British India was in turmoil. The Britishers were able to carve out Pakistan, but a number of princely states were also planning their own independence. Despite the fact that these princely states come under British India, hence it is highly unlikely that the leaders of Sri Lanka, which was not a part of British India, would be willing to merge with the Indian state, especially when princely states within British India did not want to be a part of an independent India. The conflict in British India was so intense that our great leader Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, also known as India's Iron Man, had a difficult time keeping the country united. This is the reason why our neighboring states, Nepal, Myanmar and Bhutan, are separate states despite their similarities with India. The other important reason is the Sri Lankan Civil War. Yes, before the 1980s, Sri Lanka-India relations were cordial enough for people to entertain the thought that they could be one nation. However, in 1983, the civil war triggered by the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, also called LTTE, sold relations between two nations. LTTE was a guerrilla organization that wanted to establish an independent Tamil state, Eelam, in northern and eastern Sri Lanka. There were claims of India's intelligence agency, RAW, and Tamil Nadu state government funding the LTTE in the 1970s and 1980s. This did not sit well with the Sri Lankan government. But the situation changed when a peace accord was signed between the two nations, and after the assassination of India's former PM Rajiv Gandhi, India declared LTTE a terrorist organization. The civil war created a permanent rift between the two countries, on account of which Sri Lankan leaders are still skeptical of India. On top of that, China's growing dominance in the region has further widened the gulf between the two nations. So friends, these were some of the reasons that help us answer why Sri Lanka is not a part of India. Apart from that, this video is quite relevant from the perspective of UPSC mains examination, and questions related to Sri Lanka could be expected in UPSC GS2 International Relations section. So we will leave you with a question related to this topic. You could answer it in the comment section. And the question is that India and Sri Lanka are two distinct countries with interconnected history. Discuss it. And with that, that's it for the video. I hope you have liked the video, and if you have, don't forget to share it with your friends. We will meet in next video. Till then, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.